Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're going to talk about mass combat, and specifically today we're going to talk about my Dungeons and Dragons mass combat system, which I built custom. All right, and you can find it in the link below. I will discuss it here, but I invite you to say. You could tell me if I saved or sucked, right? So there's this like in D&D, you make your save or you take all the damage. They'll call it save or suck. You could say, so you could check out my Dungeons & Dragons custom built mass combat, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition custom built mass combat system, which I built for my Strixhaven campaign, and say if I got it right or if I got it wrong. All right. And today what I want to do is I just want to tell you how I managed it, like what prompted it, how I managed it, and how my players responded to it, right? And this is my personal Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition mass combat system, but I'm going to invite you to tell me about what experience have you had with D&D 5e, actually with Dungeons & Dragons any edition mass combat, because I think people have built mass combat in the previous editions. There were official rules for mass combat in previous editions. I think 2nd had it, right? I don't, and I'm thinking maybe 3rd had it too, but I don't think there was any official mass combat rules for 1E, 4E, or 5, and I know there aren't any for 5E. There are really no mass combat rules for 5E that are canon and are in place, right? There might be some stuff in the optional rules, but nothing really official. Which means that if you're doing D&D 5th edition mass combat, you got to roll your own. Now, first of all, let's talk about the elephant in the room, Matt Colville. Why don't I just use his? Matt Colville's material is scrub. I do not like his content, and I no longer trust him, right? So here's my issue with Colville, right? Colville won the tabletop role-playing game lottery, right? And everybody's like, oh, hey, we love everything you do. You make your own little company over there, and we'll go forward. Well, to me, professionalism is important. And you know what? You don't get, like, just because you're in a tabletop role-playing game company, you know, just because you do tabletop role-playing games doesn't mean you get to check out on professionalism. And I don't think Matthew Colville is professional, right? He made some jokes on Twitter about his company and what kind of movies they like to watch, and he really kind of was like, sometimes we just kind of check out and like do some really unprofessional things for, you know, like get a little phased, right? And I was like, that's kind of odd. Why would you say that publicly, right? Like, if you do that, maybe you don't, like, if you're running a company, maybe you don't say that, right? And sure enough, he ran right into a wall. Whoever was working in his company did not do the right checks on their books, and they're literally putting stickers in Matt Colville books because they don't run their company like it's a real professional company, right? You don't get to check out on quality. You don't get to check out on professionalism just because you work in the tabletop role-playing game space. So I skipped his nonsense mass combat rules because whatever they're doing over there, they ain't paying attention to business and they're not working like a professional company, in my humble opinion. And in tabletop role-playing games, I expect professionalism in my products, right? So like, whatever hobbies you got on the weekend and you and your buddies like to do, maybe don't post about that publicly on your company blog, right? Like, it's just not a good idea, right? Because it means you're on, right? And if you make a major mistake because you were phased, I'm going to be worried about it, right? So I don't trust his products at this point. All right, because he did his own, like, you know, he did his own mass combat system. I ain't touching it. I want professional product, right? I'm not like, that's why I stay with Wizards of the Coast. It's a real company. They have real professionals. They actually do their jobs, right? Like, and that's important to me. I don't like you don't get to just check out because you make tabletop role-playing game products. I do not like that. All right, so I'm sorry. That's a tangent. All right, here's what happened. So we start Strixhaven, right? And I have all these players around the table. All the players make their characters, right? I get one guy who shows up. He don't have his character ready, right? Now, this is another Scott Garibay thing. You don't have your character ready? I'm not going to give you 10 seconds of my time, right? I'm not going to make other players wait who made their character if you didn't make your character, right? So what we did was, I was like, what are you interested? I was like, say a race and say a class. You're going to slap a name on it and you're going to run it, right? Like, because I'm just going to template you, right? 5th edition has all these templates, right? Like Bandit Captain is in like, is in the monster manual. you just take it. It's got everything you need, all your attacks, everything. You're ready, right? Like you can literally have a play. You can put a play. If somebody doesn't show up at their table, for me, I'm like, pick a template, any book, I'll bring you in. But I ain't gonna give you 5 seconds of this table's time because you didn't prepare, right? And to be clear, I've sat on the other end of this. I showed up for a Shadowrun game. 4 players all got their players. 4 players. 3 all have their characters ready. 1 doesn't have a character. We waited while the dungeon master went through an hour and a half of time, right, and made another character. I'm like, this is insane. You're punishing us with an hour and a half of sitting around watching you make a character because one person wasn't prepared? That's nuts, right? Like, and so I don't do that, right? So the player's like, I'd really like to run a vampire. So one of my players said, oh, you mean a dampire? And I'm like, I don't have dampires at my table. That crap is nonsense. Nobody cares about dampires, right? You play a vampire, fine. You run the monster manual, you use the vampire slot, pick a name, you are now a Strixhaven student who is a vampire, right? So the player jumps in and he's running the monster manual block, right? Stat block, the whole 9, all the powers of a real vampire from the monster manual because he didn't prep, right? This link wouldn't even have been available to anybody who actually had their character ready, right? So it got interesting because what ends up happening at this point then is the player leaned into it and is like, how do I get my blood? And I'm like, well, Strixhaven students are literally giving their blood like in pints, right? And to keep you alive, right? And he's like, ooh, that's dark, right? So then he gets a hold of the Golthia staff from Ravenloft and starts a relationship, like a long-distance communication relationship with Strahd von Zarovich, right? Well, I never planned this, but that's the great thing about Dungeons & Dragons. You land in places you do not expect. This character, Strahd von Zarovich, takes this character named Abacus and makes him a clone of Strahd von Zarovich and says, you will be Strahd on Arcavios, and we will make Arcavios, the world where Strixhaven is, into a nightmare world, just like Ravenloft, right? And begins giving him his power, and then gives him an army, and then we have a mass combat, right? So 2 of my players, who are dedicated Strixhaven players, are now battling another player character for the fate of Strixhaven because this other player character wants to make Strixhaven into a nightmare world filled with, wolves, bats, werewolves, and vampires, right? And make it a mirror match of Barovia in Ravenloft, right? And so now, I need a mass combat system, right? Because they're not going to just fight each other. They have armies, right? Like and so my 2 player characters who each have a Strixhaven student are leading the other Strixhaven students to save their campus against this vampire lord who has all the powers of Strahd von Zarovich, but his name was Strahd von Abacus, right? And so I needed this mass combat system. So I'm not even going to tell you what the mass combat system is. You got to read it in the link below, and there's a link there, and it explains everything that is used, and the player characters actually place their people on the board, just like a board game. I ran it just like a board game, right? So basically, basically, what really kind of surprised me, right, was the response to the players. The players were like, well, what about my spells? And I'm like, your spells don't matter, right? Like, you're a general. You ain't going to be you're Captain Picard. You don't go on away missions, right? Like, I don't care how many hit points you do with your sword swing, and I don't care how many hit points you do with your fireball. That doesn't matter in mass combat. And I was shocked. My players did not like that. They did not like that their character sheets really didn't matter much in the mass combat, right? And I'm like, I'm giving you armies here, and you're coming out the other end of this as a general, right? Like, you're going to get magic items and a bunch of, I'm giving you plenty for, here. But they did not like it. And so, one, it was a great session. Everybody had it. It's a great question. I don't know. You know what? I can't tell you if they had a great time. What I can tell you is they're all showing up tonight at 6 p.m. Every single one of them. In fact, not only are they showing up, they brought 2 extra players, and we're now 6 people around the table, which I never wanted, right? Not that I didn't want it. Like, it's ballooning beyond what I expected, right? And we have a person at every single seat at the table, right? So there's like it's a thing. It is a thing, right? So, and that's how you know. If you know, it don't matter what your players say. It matters what your players do. My players show up on time, they play, and things are growing, right? So that's good, right? So, but I was really shocked that the players were like, I don't like this idea that my fireball doesn't matter. I want to be able to fireball one person. I'm like, this is a war. It doesn't matter if you fireball one person, right? Like, and so we ran it like almost like it had aspects of Risk, but I really feel like it also captured the Dungeons and Dragons aspects of it. This is my swing at mass combat in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. What do you think? Did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? Let me know in the comments below. Have you done better? Point me to your example. I'd love to see it. All that's my opinion. I'd love to see. I'm very, very eager to hear your responses back on this. Thank you so much for letting me share this. I'm so happy to be sharing my Dungeons and Dragons journey with each and every one of you. And I am going to pray for each and every one who listened to this video that your week is going to be as blessed as my week was last week. Thank you so much for letting me share my D&D, my Dungeons and Dragons journey with you. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.